Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of Fellow Feeling. This will be part 2, chapter 2, entitled Drop. Shouta takes advantage of Midoriya and Bakugou's house arrest to make arrangements for the further disciplinary action he'd promised. He takes a day or two trying to figure out what that action should be. It's clear to him now that he's let this go on for far too long, and that he needs to take drastic and immediate action. In all honesty, it would probably be best to just transfer one of them into Class 1B, reduce their contact as much as possible, ensure that they're never together during combat training, and declare their problem solved. But that's as good as throwing a band-aid over a bullet hole, and he knows it. Separating them won't erase their trauma. It'll just mask it until they're inevitably forced to work together again. Because even if they can make it through UA without killing each other, they're bound to meet in the field if they both intend to stay in Japan for their hero work. It doesn't matter how far away their agencies are. They're both going to be top 10 heroes. They will have to work together. No, this requires a more permanent solution. He needs to build trust between them. Needs to make them see that they're not enemies, that they can depend on each other. And that's not something he can do in a classroom, not with kids as traumatized as Midoriya and Bakugou. He calls Nezu. "Why don't you take them on patrols?" is the suggestion from the other end of the line. "Patrols," he echoes. "You mean real hero patrols, in the city?" "Well, why not?" There are about 1,000 reasons why not. UA is clearly being targeted by the League for one. For another, they're kids. They shouldn't be anywhere dangerous. They especially shouldn't be anywhere dangerous when they refuse to work together and are generally at each other's throats. In a crisis, their lack of cooperation could spell death for themselves and for Shouta. "Oh, stop worrying," Nezu chastises, his voice fuzzy through the bad connection. "Ryuko's agency is just down the road from UA, and her jurisdiction is one of the safest in all of Japan. I'll ask her if you can take your students there. They'll be perfectly safe." His students have been perfectly safe before, though, and they've still ended up kidnapped or hospitalized. But Nezu does have a point. Taking his problem children on regular patrols in the city might help them begin to trust each other. If they're forced to work on a team long-term, surely their walls will begin to crumble, and Shouta can get a closer look at just what's causing the almost fanatical way they circle each other. It's going to be difficult, though. He knows Midoriya doesn't trust him much, and while Bakugou isn't nearly as skittish, he's still suspicious of everything and everyone. He'll have to get them to trust him first. Still, it seems like his best option. "Call Ryuko," he says. "Patrols," Midoriya squeaks out on Monday afternoon, after both him and Bakugou are pulled out of hero basic training. You're joking, right?" "Do I look like I'm joking?" Midoriya goes pale as a sheet, his jaw snapping shut so fast that it makes an audible click. And shit, he really needs to remember to drop some of the dry sarcasm around the kid, because clearly he thinks that Shouta is actually angry. Bakugou looks equally suspicious, though he doesn't seem particularly bothered by Shota's harshness. Of the two of them, he's definitely faster to trust authority, though he's less likely to obey it. "Is this a punishment?" he asks, and Shouta can see the gears turning behind his eyes, searching out every way the situation could go sour. "Because if you think going on patrol with a pro hero is supposed to be a punishment, you're shitting yourself." "Kachan!" Midoriya hisses, horrified, but Shouta brushes it off. "It's not a punishment," he assures them, which makes Midoriya look a little less pale. "Think of this as extra training. You'll get to patrol with a pro and get experience in the field. Bakugou, I know you've already learned about patrols from your internship, but this will be a new experience for you, Midoriya, so I expect you to pay attention." He nods so fiercely that Shouta half thinks he's going to knock himself over. Bakugou, on the other hand, cocks a curious brow. "So this is a reward?" he says. "What, are you saying that if we beat each other up, we get to patrol the city looking for real villains? Seems a pretty small price to pay for one-on-one patrols with a pro hero." Shouta takes immense satisfaction in the way Bakugou's expression drops as he says, "Who said this would be one-on-one?" It takes a moment for it to sink in. The boys stare at him, confused, trying to figure out what he means, but then it clicks, and the two of them swing their heads to look at each other in horror. Midoriya looks like a ghost. "Sensei, are you sure? You're telling me I have to work with him? I'll never. I mean, the two of us aren't exactly—" "Shut the fuck up, Deku, I'll kill—" "Kachan, stop yelling!" Shouta silences them with a barked, "I wasn't done talking." Then once they've settled down, The three of us will be going on these patrols together. You have no say in the matter, so don't try to argue. Until you've convinced me that you can work together, you won't be returning to basic training." "Just for today?" Midoriya asks hopefully. "Or—" "I said, until you've convinced me." Midoriya and Bakugou watch each other, sizing each other up maybe, or just coming to terms with their fate. Shouta can't quite tell. But whatever strange silent words pass between them, they must eventually come to the same conclusion because they don't try to argue. And really, Shouta doesn't intend to keep them out of basic training for long. He's only doing this now because Yagi had assured him that this week's classes were relatively boring, consisting of simple exercises that Midoriya and Bakugou really have no need of. After this week, he'll let them go back. He just needs to apply a bit of pressure so that they take this seriously. They can't think this is something they can bluff their way through. They don't have to be friends by the end of the week. They don't have to even get along, despite his threat. If Shouta can just figure out the cause of the strange, violent animosity between them, he'll call this a victory. But they don't need to know that. "Change into your costumes and meet me at the school gates," Shouta tells them flatly, tossing each of them a hall pass. "Our first patrol begins immediately." At the time, he has no way of knowing what his good intentions will lead to. He has no concept of the disaster that awaits them. Soon, he'll wish that he'd left the situation well enough alone, because Midoriya and Bakugou might hate each other, might tear at each other's throats whenever they get the chance, but at least they wouldn't be, well. The patrol starts out okay. Ryuko has given them permission to patrol a predetermined chunk of the city under her jurisdiction, which is easily accessible via a short subway ride. She'd promised to patrol the area herself before his arrival, thus ensuring that no nasty criminals are hiding in any dark corners, and she's also positioned sidekicks at the border of their assigned patrol area, in case of an emergency. In short, she's ensured that their patrol will be safe almost to a fault. There's little chance they'll run into so much as a petty thief, but then again, he'd much rather run a boring patrol than a life-threatening one, especially where his students are concerned. As promised, the patrol is quiet. Shouta doesn't immediately try to press Midoriya and Bakugou, more focused on getting them comfortable with the environment before he throws anything too intense at them. The purpose of being here isn't to terrify them, after all. He's trying to build trust. "Keep up," Shouta calls when Midoriya trips over his own feet. Then has to remind himself that he needs to be careful with the kid. Wincing, he amends. "We can slow down if you need time to adjust, but you have to say something. You can't just fall behind." Midoriya shakes his head violently. "I'm fine, I promise. I just stumbled." Bakugou tisks under his breath, and Shouta swears he picks up on a muttered, "Stupid Deku." "What was that, Bakugou?" "Nothing, Aizawa-sensei." Shouta draws in a slow, deep breath, trying to maintain his cool. These two aren't going to be easy to crack, even in the field where anything could happen. They're more focused on each other than they are on the environment. The lack of trust between them is almost nauseating. Midoriya acts like he thinks Bakugou is going to turn on him at any moment. Bakugou snaps and snarls like Midoriya's every attempt at communication is a personal affront. He's got a week to work on this, he reminds himself. In a week, he should be able to make some progress. Reintroduce them under positive circumstances, teach them to associate each other's presence with safety and trust. He realizes distantly that he's thinking about this in the same way he'd thought about introducing Bastard to Garbage, letting the two cats paw at each other through a half-closed door, separating them when their claws came out, and using little plush cat toys and food to build a positive association. It's not that different, these patrols. All he has to do is convince his problem children that they aren't each other's problem. Something clatters unexpectedly, a man dropping his briefcase on the cement, and Midoriya nearly jumps out of his skin, which makes Bakugou jump too. And because Bakugou has no idea how to handle his fear, he snaps, lashing out at Midoriya like he's offended him by being startled. Shouta sighs deeply. What is he going to do? "You two, fall in line," he barks, and the two snap to attention as if stricken by a live wire. "Do I need to remind you why you're here? If you can't shape up, you'll never return to basic training." Bakugou glares at the ground, fists clenched. "Sorry," he mutters, sounding none too pleased about it. Midoriya worries at his lower lip anxiously, like he thinks the ground might swallow him up if he doesn't say the right thing. Sorry, Aizawa-sensei." "If you're really sorry, then do better." Then when Midoriya shrinks in on himself. "I'm not angry at either of you, and there's very little you could do to change that, but you have to understand that the way you two are now, You're a danger to both yourselves and others. Midoriya flinches. Beside him, Bakugou grits his teeth. Do you understand? Shouta presses, gentle but firm. If you want to dislike each other on your own time, that's fine. But when it starts affecting your hero work, that's when it becomes a problem. What happens if both of you are called to a scene and someone dies because you can't work together? What kind of heroes would that make you? Midoriya mutters an answer under his breath, but it's too quiet to hear. Shouta lets him get away with it. These patrols aren't a punishment, but they aren't going to be easy, he continues. If either of you want to return to basic training anytime soon, you're going to have to prove to me that you have the capacity to cooperate. We can, Midoriya starts, sounding like he intends to convince Shouta that despite all evidence to the contrary, they can exist in the same space without combusting into a ball of fiery anxiety and self-destruction. But he stops before the sentence gets all the way out, because he doesn't quite have the guts to lie to his face. Bakugou, on the other hand, isn't as smart. We can work together, he bites out, his voice steeped in cold fury. Didn't you watch the final exam? I watched you punch Midoriya in the face, he says flatly, and Bakugou has the sense to look chastised. You were uncooperative and violent, and your actions led to both yourself and Midoriya sustaining unnecessary injuries. In a fight against a real villain, you both would have been killed. Bakugou doesn't respond. Then, in a small voice, It's not Kachan's fault, Aizawa-sensei, so please don't blame him. He turns his tired eyes on Midoriya. The kid is trembling very slightly as he puts himself between his teacher and his rival like some kind of masochistic punching bag, and he doesn't seem quite willing to make eye contact. Bakugou puffs up like a cat because he always seems the angriest right after Midoriya tries to defend him. He's clearly revving up to deliver a truly scathing comment, but he must remember at the last second that he's supposed to behave because he deflates with nothing more than a muttered, I don't need your help. It's progress that he's even willing to pretend he's not angry. Maybe there's hope for them after all. He sighs again, running a hand through his hair. Let's keep going, he says, deciding that they've had enough for the moment. Midoriya, keep an eye on our back. Bakugou, I want you watching our sides. And because they don't know that this area is absolutely secure, because they think there might actually be a threat out there, they obey without a word. It'll be a good trust exercise, he thinks. Let Bakugou depend on Midoriya to watch his back, and let Midoriya depend on Bakugou to watch his sides. Shouta will handle what's directly in front of them, and they should all feel more comfortable with each other before long. They make it all of 10 minutes before something goes wrong. It starts with a phone call, which surprises him because there's no reason anyone should be calling him unless it's an emergency. He feels even more alarmed when he checks the caller ID and sees it's Ryuko. Eraserhead! She snaps through the earpiece, and his heart skips a beat at the downright frantic tone of her voice. Where are you? He's so startled that it takes him a moment to register the question. We're at the corner of J and L Street, he says. Why, is there something? Ryuko gives an uncharacteristic curse. Get your students out of there. There was an incident in the next city over. The villain shot through our line of defense and is fleeing your way. He barely stops himself from responding with visible alarm. He can't let Midoriya and Bakugou know that anything is wrong. Either one of them might panic, or more likely they might do something stupid like try to intercept the villain. Very calmly, he says, Midoriya, Bakugou, let's step into this building for a moment. My sidekicks and I are in pursuit. Ryuko's voice filters through the phone. Take cover and protect your students. We'll handle this. We're already somewhere safe, he tells her as he ushers Midoriya and Bakugou into the nearest building. An industrial complex that stretches many, many floors above and below ground. It's Thursday around lunchtime, so it's mostly abandoned aside from a few stragglers. The lobby itself is completely empty. Midoriya and Bakugou are looking at him quizzically, asking all kinds of confused questions, but he waves them off. I'll leave the situation to you. Contact me when it's been resolved. Stay put. We'll have the villain in custody soon. He gives a short nod, remembering too late that Ryuko can't actually see him, and hangs up. Aizawa-sensei! Midoriya bursts out almost immediately, nearly drowned out by Bakugou's irritated yelling. Is something wrong? Why did we stop here? There's a villain, isn't there? Bakugou demands, looking for all he's worth like a wild animal. There's anger in his eyes, but there's fear too, shining so bright that it almost looks unnatural, like the flare of a cat's eye off a camera lens. Shouta leads them safely to the back of the lobby, away from the large glass windows at the front of the building. There's a minor villain, fleeing this way from the adjacent city, but Ryuko and her sidekicks are already in pursuit. She asked us to stay indoors to avoid any unnecessary conflict. Calm, rational, because even though he's a bit nervous himself, what is it with these kids and villain attacks anyways? He knows that he can't let that nervousness project itself onto his students. They're here to deal with their trauma, not get more of it. We're just going to sit here, Bakugou demands, his palms already sparking. If the villain is fleeing this way, we should intercept him. This isn't our jurisdiction, Midoriya breaks in, voicing Shouta's thoughts. If Ryuko wants us to stay put, we have to listen to her. And let a villain get away? Fuck you, Deku. You may be too scared to fight, but I'm not. Kachan! Shouta steps between them, breaking the tension before it can grow thick enough to instigate a fight. Midoriya is right, he says firmly, which makes Bakugou seethe. The villain isn't our problem. Besides, have you already forgotten the point of us being here? I wouldn't trust either of you in a fight right now. Bakugou sobers at that, drawing back like he's been kicked. I could take him, he grumbles, but he doesn't try to head for the door, so Shouta considers it a win. Okay, this is the same drill as patrolling the street, Shouta says, keeping his voice perfectly level. Midoriya, I want you to watch our right side for any suspicious movement. Bakugou, take our left. I'll take the entrance. If either of you see the villain, speak up immediately, and stay away from the windows. Yes, Sensei. Yeah, whatever. They fan out. Shouta keeps a careful eye on his students as they obey his orders, keeping a safe distance from the windows as they peer into the streets beyond. He doesn't expect either of them to see anything. Of all the buildings in the city, surely the villain won't cross this one in particular. But it'll be good for them to work together like this. They can make the most of a tense situation. Except... Aizawa-sensei. He hums, looking over to where Midoriya is standing on the right side of the lobby. Yes? What did the villain look like? He hadn't gotten a description, he realizes. He doesn't even know if the villain is flying, running, driving, or something else entirely. Not sure. Why? Do you see someone? There's a pause as Midoriya squints out the window. I think so. Do you want to... But that's as far as he gets before every window in the entire lobby shatters, and Midoriya is flung like a rag doll against the back wall. Midoriya! A dark form leaps through the shattered window, skidding in the glass, and Shota's attention is drawn to the man that's just landed in front of him. He looks like some kind of beast, hulking and reptilian, eye-slitted and filled with surprise. He hadn't expected anyone to be in the lobby, just like they hadn't expected to be bowled over by a fleeing villain. And this is the fleeing villain, Shouta is certain. It's just his luck that this simple, safe patrol had turned into a serious encounter. The villain blinks, his expression flicking from shock to irritation to confidence. Heroes, he rumbles, and his voice matches his scaly exterior. Calculating, Shouta flicks his eyes to where Midoriya is slumped against the wall, coughing and struggling to get back to his feet. That hit had been hard. He's probably out of breath. No way he'll be able to run, not just yet. But if Bakugou can get Midoriya out of here, if the two of them can get to safety... Die, die, die! Bakugou roars, throwing himself at the villain faster than his eye can track, and Shota's heart makes a concerted effort to jump out of his chest. The villain is huge. They have no idea what kind of power he has buried beneath that thick, scaly skin, and Midoriya is still in the line of fire. What is that idiot doing? Frantic, Shouta throws his capture weapon, yanking Bakugou out of the villain's grasp, a split second before a set of fierce, deadly claws can sink into his arm. And those claws are dripping, Shouta realizes. Thick, clear fluid clings to them, probably secreting from his nail beds, and Shota's stomach turns. Venom. But what is its purpose? To kill or something worse? What the hell are you doing? Bakugou demands, whirling around like he intends to attack again. I was about to land a hit. Look at his claws, Shouta snaps, and watches the way Bakugou looks up, his fierce expression melting into one of alarm as he realizes what had almost just happened. Whatever that fluid is, you don't want it in your bloodstream. Bakugou's expression darkens, and some of the cockiness drains out of him as he realizes how serious this is. If the venom secreting from the villain's fingertips is meant to kill, one scratch might end any of them. The villain lets out an amused rumble, circling them like a shark. Shouta turns on his heel, careful to keep Midoriya at his back as he finally struggles his way back to his feet. Bakugou falls behind him as well, slipping into a defensive stance that somehow still radiates aggression. Midoriya, Bakugou, Shouta says low. Get out of the building. What? Is the venomous reply. Fuck you, I'm not running. Maybe Deku is weak enough to run away, but... This is a confined space, and we're up against someone stronger and larger than us. This is not the place for a fight like this. Do you understand? Bakugou snaps his jaw shut, eyes flashing bitterly, but he doesn't get the chance to protest further before the villain finally grows tired of waiting and charges forward with a roar. Shouta recoils, readying his capture weapon, but he's blinded by a wave of green. Midoriya, recovered and flashing with power, leaping in front of him to take the brunt of the blow. He's smart. He doesn't let those claws touch his skin. Instead, he catches the blow with his forearms, shoes skidding in the dust, and cries out in determination as he flings the villain back with his quirk. So much for avoiding a fight in close quarters. The villain crashes into the far wall, making the building shake. 3 heroes, he rumbles, and Shouta figures out rather quickly that he's not particularly intelligent. He's strong, venomous, and that's the end of it. 3 on 1. Unfair. Shouta lowers his stance, his capture weapon held firmly between his hands. His quirk is useless in a situation like this. No matter how hard he tries, he won't be able to erase a mutation quirk, and this particular mutation seems especially powerful. And though the villain seems stupid, that won't matter in a close-quarters fight, not when he's so strong. The villain lurches, claws reaching for them, and Bakugou intercepts with a cry. Explosions ring out as he leaps, propelling himself low and precise in the confined space, sliding between the villain's arm and hitting him in the side with a massive explosion that makes the building tremble for a second time. And the villain doesn't even flinch. Bakugou sneers, whipping out of the villain's reach and skidding on the ground, whirling to get a foothold on his spiked tail before he can use it to sweep him off his feet. His back is covered in long, deadly spines, and Bakugou clings to them as he lets off a few massive explosions that again do nothing. What is this villain made of, that he can shrug off Bakugou's explosions? Seeming to reach the same conclusion that Shouta has already arrived at, Bakugou leaps off the villain's back and hits the ground rolling, trying to get clear. But he's either overestimated his own speed or underestimated the villain's, because a massive, scaly arm draws back before Bakugou can get fully out of the way. Recognizing the impending danger, Shouta tosses his capture weapon, wrapping around the villain's arm before he can smash Bakugou to bits, and pulls. But the villain is too strong. Of course he's too strong. And Shouta has a split second to realize that he's about to be pulled into the villain's fist before a gloved hand closes around his weapon and yanks, crackling with green, and the villain is unbalanced with a shocked roar. Midoriya lets the capture weapon fall from his grasp and leaps, his legs sweeping around to deliver a devastating blow to the villain's head. His quirk is the only one that has a significant effect, it seems, because the villain snarls and howls with pain, clutching at his injured head, arms flailing dangerously. One of those deadly arms swipes at Midoriya, and Shouta feels his stomach twist just before the kid turns, catching those claws on his steel soles and letting the momentum carry him back to safety. He hits the ground sliding, eyes wide and anxious, but he's unharmed, and that's what matters. So strong, Midoriya whispers, shifting his weight between his feet, as if the impact had stung. Aizawa-sensei. Ryuko will be here soon, he snaps as the villain flails, rolling his massive body in an attempt to get back on his feet. With her size, she can take down this villain easily. We just have to play defense for a little longer. Defense, Bakugou hisses, and alarm bells ring in Shota's head. There's no reason for defense. Stand back and I'll kill this bastard myself. Midoriya's eyes flash. Kachan, you can't beat this guy on your own. Our quirks aren't suited for this. We have to... Fuck off, Deku. I don't need to do anything you say. I'm not trying to give you orders. I'm trying to help you. I don't need your help. The exchange takes less than 30 seconds, but in the time Bakugou spends screaming, the villain rights himself and lashes out, aiming right for his head. Shouta is hardly fast enough. He doesn't even have time to reach for his capture weapon. He has to throw himself in between the villain and Bakugou. He flings his arm up, in a vague imitation of how Midoriya had saved him not 2 minutes prior, using his forearm to catch the blow as it swings forward, and he chokes on a wordless cry as he feels the bone splinter. Shit. How does Midoriya do this on a weekly basis and keep fighting? The pain is white-hot, like fire. Sensei! The villain grips and flings, his fingers biting into his broken arm, spinning him around like a top and flinging him hard against the back wall. His head spins as he slides down, collapsing onto his side with a low groan. If not for his capture weapon, which had been wound around his arm, those claws would have pierced straight through his skin. He'd been very lucky. The kids, on the other hand, it's chaos. They don't know how to fight together. Every lesson they'd learned during their final has been forgotten, under the pressure of a real battle. Midoriya tries to dodge, and Bakugou tries to attack, and they clash, hitting each other on accident and skidding to the ground. Look where you're going, Deku! I'm trying! Midoriya lurches to one side as a massive fist crashes into a support pillar right next to him. An ominous rumble shakes the building's foundation, cracks spreading along the pillar like spiderwebs, but only Shouta notices. Bakugou leaps and flies, cracking into the villain's side like a bullet, and letting off an explosion so intense that one of the remaining walls is blown clean out. Shota's heart leaps, but this time for a different reason entirely. The building is going to... He staggers to his feet, his vision blurring, his arm throbbing, and he curses himself for his unsteadiness. It's always stupidly difficult to recover from being struck in the head, and this is very unfortunate timing. Bakugou tries to attack again, tries to aim for the villain's face, but he's just a bit too slow. The villain catches him, fingers curling around his arms and shattering both of his gauntlets, and he shrieks as those claws bite at the skin through the heat-resistant rubber that remains, leaving fierce indentations in their wake. The rubber padding beneath the gauntlets is protecting him from being cut, but... Let go of him! But Midoriya's already attacking, kicking off the ground with so much power that the walls sway, aiming for the arm that holds Bakugou aloft by both wrists. And he gets as far as laying a hand on the villain's scaly skin before it all goes wrong. Because the villain is stupid, but he's not so stupid that he couldn't predict that Midoriya would launch for his classmate if he was captured. The villain's other arm sweeps down, hulking and deadly, and Shouta can only watch in mute horror as his student is caught around the chest, the villain's hand large enough to circle halfway around him without effort. Midoriya's eyes go almost comically wide. Bakugou's arms are padded by tough, thin rubber, which means the villain's claws are held away from his skin by a narrow margin. But Midoriya's costume is really nothing more than a glorified sweatsuit, and Shouta watches the moment that Midoriya realizes it. The villain grips, his claws dragging 4 fierce gashes in Midoriya's right side, his thumb digging a deep, deadly hole in his left, and Midoriya screams. There's this split second where Shouta can't breathe, where his eyes are fixed on the place where those claws meet Midoriya's flesh, red blooming out across his sides and mixing with the green of his costume to form a dark, muddy brown, and he can't breathe. Time begins to move again. Shouta takes in a deep, gasping breath. Many things happen at once. Bakugou cries out as if he's the one that's wounded, screaming some incoherent combination of what Shouta thinks is "let me go and I'll kill you." Shouta moves, forcing his injured arm to bear the weight of his capture weapon as he throws it out, coiling around Midoriya's torso in an attempt to yank him free from the villain's grasp. Bakugou's palms boom with explosions larger than any Shouta has ever seen, aimed at the villain, the walls, the roof, desperately trying to free himself. He yelps as those claws finally slip through the rubber, nicking his skin, but it doesn't matter because he frees himself and lets off a massive explosion right in the villain's face. The villain staggers, his grip on Midoriya lessens, and in the split second of leniency he's granted, Shouta yanks as hard as he can. Midoriya crashes into him, like a boulder, knocking him back against the wall. His vision fuzzes over for a second time as his head knocks the plaster, but he still has the presence of mind to wrap his arms around Midoriya and turn as Bakugou fires off another explosion, shielding the injured child from the debris that flies through the air. "Midoriya," he calls over the crackle of explosions, lowering the kid to the ground so he can get a better look at his injuries. "Midoriya, can you hear me?" His eyes are closed. He shakes his head mutely, his breath shortening until he sounds like he's on the edge of hyperventilating. He's coherent, at least, but Shouta can see clear, viscous fluid dripping from the wounds, no doubt coursing through his bloodstream, and it's terrifying. These cuts are so close to his heart. If the venom is meant to kill, and if it circulates too quickly. Shouta grounds himself with a shaking breath, telling himself that this is not the time to panic. He has to get Midoriya to safety, and he has to do it now. "Stay awake," he orders, even as Midoriya's eyes remain firmly closed. "Midoriya, you have to stay awake, do you hear me? Look at me, problem child." Something, the nickname maybe he isn't sure, makes Midoriya shift. The kid's eyelids flutter, his gaze hazy and distant, and for a moment there's just nothing behind his eyes, like he's staring through Shouta instead of at him. But it doesn't last long. Midoriya's gaze sharpens in a snap, a brief and terrifying moment of delirium, and the expression on his face is one that Shouta can only describe as pure and utter terror. "Dad?" he whispers, and Shouta is absolutely horrified of the implications of that. Of the fact that he's delirious and flushed and bleeding profusely from multiple wounds, but he doesn't get much longer to ponder it. Behind him, Bakugou lets out a particularly loud explosion, making the building groan. And Shouta isn't sure if that's the trigger or if it's something else entirely, something that only Midoriya can see, but whatever thread of sanity is binding him frays and snaps with a resounding twang. Midoriya screams, his body lighting up green, a firestorm of debris and combusting nitroglycerin and electricity coursing around him, and the building gives out. Shouta has a split second to yank Bakugou to him, to fix Midoriya with a sharp glance that erases his quirk, before the world goes dark. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 2 of Fellow Feeling. Chapter 3 will be up next. I hope you all are still enjoying this one. I'm eager to hear your thoughts and reactions to the second chapter. And as always, thank you so much for listening.